Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
Well, hello and welcome to the MuseCast. We've got the gang here, and by gang, I mean me and Dan.
The gang of two.
The gang of two. Shawna, Boren, Dan, Kent. It's so good to be with you all today. This past weekend, we got to hear from Dan all about fasting. And just FYI, you guys, he was munching on some healthy pistachios before we started rolling. How are you feeling, Dan, like after all the buildup, all the studying and everything, and then the sermon? Like, do you have like a deflate moment, or do you just like roll right into the next thing?
Well, you know how it is. Unfortunately, you get pushed into the next thing. So,
yeah,
but
exactly.
And then this time was really different because my mom actually drove over to watch, and so my mom, it was so fun. That was her first time seeing me preach in person. So that was really fun. And then this is funny. So her and her husband Dwayne came out, and then we went to TGI Fridays and totally ate this big meal after the sermon on fasting. So, but like I said, celebration meals are good, and so
yes. Did you have a burger?
I had the plant-based burger.
Yes, they have the Beyond Meat there.
It's so good.
That's good. It is so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but then I crash. Then I like sit sometimes staring at the wall for an hour, just like fried. Because it's a lot of stuff to hold in your head as you're kind of going along. Plus, I don't like memorize my sermons. So, there's always like some ad-libbing and some things that either Satan or the Holy Spirit nudges me to say. And then that sometimes throws me off and I got to find my way. You know how it is. And so it's a lot of mental work. It's a lot of mental work. And I love it. I mean, it's fun too. So.
Yeah. It's there's a lot going on. And then you're also like talking to people, and then you're talking to people, and and then you've got to make up for things that got forgotten before you got up there.
Yeah.
It can be a lot, but high five.
But I feel great.
High five to you.
Oh, wait, hold on. Wait, we got to get the high five cam.
High five cam.
Okay, there we go.
High five cam.
All right, Woo! There you go. Perfect.
All right, Dan. Well, you are in such a unique position that you always give us a summary to kind of kick off the MuseCast. And this Sunday you gave the sermon. So you're going to give a summary of your own sermon.
Yeah. The temptation is to just basically read you the whole sermon again because it's all important. That's why I put it in there.
Yeah. So let me tell you this. This is going to be a summary of what you did say.
Yes.
And then we're going to give you an opportunity to dive a little bit more into what you didn't say, or say more about what you did say, but you had to leave some stuff out. So summary on what you did say, and then we'll give you the floor for more.
Sounds good. Well, I'm going to be super brief. I did do the fast or sermon on fasting, and it was really. It's one of those sermons where at first I thought, well, this will be easy. It's just one simple thing. There's no complexity to it, Well, it turns out there's a lot of complexity to it, and fasting sort of works in different and does different things for people in different cultures and different life situations and stuff like that. So what I really wanted to do is I really wanted to look at how might fasting help with the kind of age of abundance that we are in right now. And in an age where science has discovered how to make food extremely pleasurable and calorie dense, and we haven't really understood the consequences of all that yet, and we're starting to see that. And I wanted to see how fasting might liberate us from some of the consequences of really some amazing progress that we've made in the world. And so I looked at fasting as it relates to hedonic adaptation. And hedonic adaptation is simply that we get used to pleasure. And the idea there is that if we have a hamburger, that's really good. If we have a cheeseburger, it's even better. If we put mayonnaise and bacon on there, it's even better than that. And then when you go back to a hamburger, it doesn't taste as good as it used to. And that's because we've adapted to this greater pleasure. But not only that, if I have a hamburger with cheese and bacon today, and if it's on a scale of 0 to 100, it's a 90, tomorrow it's only going to be an 85. and the next day it's only going to be at 80. And we adapt to that higher pleasure. And so in order to get to those higher dopaminergic levels, we have to keep adding things that are sugary, fatty, and salty, which is not good for us. And so that to chase that higher experience, we end up hurting ourselves more, and we end up going on this downward spiral. So I looked at how fasting can recalibrate us and make us sensitive to pleasure again at those lower levels, so that we can enjoy food that isn't as destructive, and hopefully be able to eat and not hurt ourselves. Which is not to say that you can't have the bacon cheeseburger and stuff like that. It's just to say that you have to recalibrate. You have to, you can't have that for every meal, because first of all, it's not as pleasurable if you have it every meal. And secondly, your body adapts to it, and it kind of lowers the experience of all other foods. And then the other part I looked at was, when Jesus says, do not show others that you are fasting, I really looked at how Jesus is calling us into this discipline, at least, to have personal integrity around this, to not eat and to not do these disciplines for some type of personal gain in your community. And so that's, and we really do, we have this tendency to alter our behaviors for the benefit of how others might see us. And that sort of makes the disciplines that we're doing all about us and all about them. And it's not supposed to be about them. It's supposed to be about our own freedom and our own relationship to God. And then I just talked about, and then as a theme throughout the whole sermon, I kind of talked about the Exodus story and how each of us are on this personal Exodus. And as we go through life, we can get trapped by pleasure, and we have to, use disciplines to escape those traps and to keep ourselves out of those traps. And then I talked about how other people perceive us might also be a trap. And however we do our disciplines, we have to do it with the right motivation, and we have to do it in the context of the right story. That all of these things, all of these disciplines are meant to give us autonomy and integrity, so that we can have an authentic relationship with God and with each other. Because if you are doing everything just because of how you think other people are going to perceive you, and you're basically doing it to please them or to posture to them, well, then you're not really distinct from them, and you can't really have an authentic relationship with them. So that's sort of the summary, and there's a lot more in there, and a lot more that wasn't in there. So I'm really curious to hear what you think, because we didn't talk afterwards, so I have no idea what you think of this sermon.
Dun, dun, dun. No, first of all, I was hoping, because you remember you were like batting around a couple of different titles, and I loved personal Exodus. I just thought that was bull, but it's okay. It's okay. When we fast is good too.
It wasn't my choice, just for the record. It was not my choice.
I know Danny Jingles. I know. First, I have a confession to make, because you talked, and I thought it was a very effective, illustrative point about the baked potato. You all know, Dan, I'm from the South. And so back in the day, for me, a baked potato included all the magic that you had, but also like chopped beef. like we put meat or steak in the potato, potato. So it was truly a loaded potato. However, I am not a meat eater any longer. I don't eat meat. But I don't think that my baked potato is any healthier, because I do butter and salt and pepper, sour cream and cheese and ranch.
Wow, that's a good potato right there. It's yummy.
So I'm confessing that to you, Dan, because I was like, man, okay. But the content of your sermon, I was really thinking, I felt like I knew what you would talk about, because you're talking about fasting. However, you really zoomed out and gave this really great big picture of what fasting is, the spiritual practice of fasting and what it can be. And this is something that you said in the front end. You said the noise of existence can drown out the presence of God. And you said that fasting can help us tune back in. I just thought that was so brilliant and so beautiful. And then when you talked about how God came for his bride, but his bride has been seduced by a wicked suitor. Again, I just feel like that whole like zooming out and seeing where this fits into the broader picture of God's story was just really helpful, intelligent, and a way to approach this that I wasn't expecting. And so that was really cool. So I'm going to give you some other just like one-liners. There was so much content underneath these lines, but I'm just going to give you some of my favorites besides the two I just shared. Oh yes, it's easier to get out of Egypt than to get Egypt out of us. See, you can tell like why I like the personal Exodus title, right?
Yeah,
like,
right. Totally.
just
Yeah.
that was all so good. My potato tastes like a shoe. Oh, but seriously, so for me, like the heart sing moment was, and it was encouraging, it was challenging. It was when you said between every captivity and a promised land, there is a desert that you must walk through, but God will meet you there. And I just was like, oh my gosh, hallelujah, yes. We are bullied by other people's opinion of us and perception of us, but we are just loved. We are just loved. And if we just walked that out, we can enjoy the world without being swallowed up by the world. So
Yeah.
you can tell that, Dan, you're very creative. We know this about you. You're very creative and in your writing and stuff. And we joke around on staff that you're Danny Jingles, but like this to me is evidence, because there were so many just like statements, sentences, like points that were just like stand out, like shining bright, like kind of moments throughout the sermon. And so I can't even imagine what all didn't make it into it. But finally, I'll just end with this. Jesus calls each into a personal exodus from both of these traps. And so again, this wasn't just about fasting. It was about fasting, but about so much more. And I was just really encouraged by everything that you shared. And like I just said, I can't imagine what else you didn't get to share, but I'm excited because we've got you here today to kind of dive into that too. So good job, my friend. Good job.
Hey, thank you so much for that feedback. And I do have fun with the turns of phrase and stuff like that. And that's sort of like how I get paid, is I get to do that. And the jokes too. I like to throw jokes in there too. So,
so good.
But the danger, anytime you talk about anything related to food, there are so many different food ideologies, and people are so passionate about their ideologies, the Atkins method and, South Beach diet, and there's veganism, and there's, whole food plant-based, and there's, what's the one, I can't remember the one that's like,
keto.
Keto. That's the one. That's a big one that people just like, it's like each one is like a little religion. And I have opinions about all of that as well. And, but I tried not to, kind of bend it for or against any of those. And that was really a challenge. The other thing too, is that people have eating disorders and diagnostic problems with their relationship with food. And that's another thing that I would love to talk about, because I've had a lot of experience, working in mental health with people with all of those different things. But you just have to be careful, because, each anorexic is dealing with like a whole world of different issues than another. And so you have to be careful with blanket statements about that. But definitely, I mean, one of the things I talked about is that in a lot of the adolescent experiences in working with adolescents with anorexia, one common theme that I saw a lot was that they were really good at having control over their hedonic adaptation, but absolutely miserable at having control over their contextual adaptation, or how they think other people perceive them. And so that's an example where I think you need to talk about both of these things that Jesus does when he says, when you fast, which you should do because you need to have control over hedonic adaptation, but don't do it for other people, because you can be really good at this one and still get trapped by this one. And that's what I see a lot with adolescent anorexics. By the time people get older, usually that disorder is a lot more complex than that. But it's a good example. But I didn't want to talk about it because you have to be careful about talking about that, because everybody with a disorder is going to be unique. The other thing that I left out that I really wanted to talk about is that a problem that we have with our food now is that it tends to be calorically dense, but nutritionally shallow. Yeah. And so the problem that makes it tough, and when you look at like obesity rates, type 2 diabetes rates, heart disease rates, it inversely or like exponentially impacts the poor worse than it does the wealthy. And what the problem with that is that if you have the poor are experiencing obesity because their food is nutritionally vacant, even though it's calorically dense, well, now you have obese people who are poor, and people are like, well, they obviously don't have economic problems because they're all obese. And so they obviously have plenty. But the fact is that they don't. And so the obesity hides the real economic struggle that people are having in those communities. And that's where, the better the church and the better the world gets at understanding some of these forces. I think it is part of a social justice issue, taking care of these food deserts and so forth.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, and just really quickly, Dan, onto that point, like so many who are in need in that way, the resources that they get only allow for the poorest quality of foods. It's the boxed things, the canned, like the things that aren't really great nutritionally, the least expensive things. And so it's a cycle. So that's a really cool aspect of this that I'm really glad to hear that you were thinking through. And I totally get why you couldn't bring all this out.
You couldn't. No, I know.
Sunday.
Yeah. And I remember too, as a kid, like if I had $5 and I went to the convenience store, do you remember, did you have that situation where you got a couple dollars as a kid and now you can go buy whatever you want? And that kind of like childhood budgeting that you do where you're trying to get your biggest bang for your buck. And so you're not going to go get like, an apple or anything like that. You're going to get like a Hostess cake because you can get like a nut bar or like, a big kind of thing for like 80 cents, $1. Well, that's great. Now look at how much left I have over. That's the same thing. Buns,
do you remember like I think I'd pass out now, but those huge honey buns were like so cheap that you could just get like a truckload of them and you'd be good to go.
Absolutely. But you look at like, that's the same situation that a lot of families are in, where it's like they can't afford to do like a whole wheat, loaf of bread and like, whole wheat pasta. They end up getting macaroni and cheese because it's, a tenth to the cost. And that's the stuff that it tastes good. It's filling. It's literally fattening, but you don't get any nutritional bang out of it. And so, that's I think a major thing that I hope that we evolve more socially and we're able to solve that problem. Another thing is there's just so many things in the Bible that I didn't even get a chance to get at. And people were emailing me saying, oh, that reminds me of this and this and this. And it's all stuff I had in my pile here. I just couldn't get to it all. But one of them I have to say, because I wish I could have found a way to get this one in here. This is in Ephesians 4, 18 and 19. And Paul says this, he says, they darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardening of their hearts. And this is the key part, verse 19. Having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality so as to indulge in every kind of impurity, and they are full of greed. And, he says it right there. When you lose sensitivity, you're going to indulge because you have to overcompensate. When you lose sensitivity to something, you're going to need more in order to get the same bang for your buck. And so you end up kind of like overcompensating for your insensitivity, and that's where indulgence comes from. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. And then he relates it to greed, because if it takes, in order for you to get a 70, in pleasure in your food, if you have to do a burger with cheese and mayo and an egg on top and bacon and a donut, that's a lot that you're doing there. I mean, first of all, you're killing 4 animals just to make that one sandwich. And then you've got, all of this other stuff. You're going to need more resources. And so it's absolutely related to greediness, that lack of sensitivity, which I think is profound. And then he also relates it in verse 18. He says, they darkened in their understandings and separated from the life of God. And you see that too, where you get so fixated on getting that pleasure that you darken, you ignore. He uses the word ignorance, which means to ignore. You ignore these truths because you're just so obsessed with that indulgence, and you end up separating from life the way that God intends it. I just think it beautifully captures this point that I was trying to make. And why on God's green earth did I not get this verse in the sermon? I don't know. I should have worked harder to do it. So.
Well, this is why you have today to kind of dive into that. About this greed thing, you could that can translate to almost every single area of life. Think about drinking, think about sex, think about just how you relate to other people. Like when you're doing it from a place of greed, you just need more, and it doesn't satisfy, and so you feel like you think you have to keep filling. Like you're saying, if you're needing an 80 every time, you're just not going to be satisfied, and then it's just this never-ending cycle. And so, wow, yeah, interesting verse, and I kind of would have loved to have heard it, but hey, we're hearing it now. And so now my brain is going again. And I'm like, great. Now I've got to reflect and ponder more. Thanks a lot, Dan.
Yeah. So that's Ephesians 4, 18 and 19. And really the whole chapter is good, but
Yeah.
So those are the big things. And I got to tell you, I didn't know how people would react to this. I have not had more reaction, more emotional reaction to any of my sermons. I think this is the 17th or 18th time I've preached, and I've had pretty easily the most emotional response to this, where people have just felt so powerless around food that to hear that it's, first of all, it's not because they're immoral. It's not because they're lazy. It's because there is stuff going on beneath the surface that dupes us into having this bondage. And being able to see that, being able to see that there is a way out of that hedonic adaptation, and to maybe free themselves from the struggle. I was pleasantly surprised at how liberating that was for some people. And not only that, I also had somebody who was a drug counselor, and this just absolutely thrilled me that she made this connection, because she works with people with drug addiction, and this distinction between dopamine and serotonin, that dopamine is about pleasure and serotonin is largely about happiness. And what happens with drug addicts is that they want happiness, and they've been substituting whatever drug they have in order to get this feeling of pleasure, but they're still unhappy. And so when they finally have the consequences of their drug addiction get so bad that they have to quit, well, a lot of times they'll substitute dopaminergic food as their new addiction, and that still doesn't solve the problem. And so she was just ecstatic about just making this distinction for people to say, look, if you're coming off of the drugs, don't go to food and replace it, because it's just a different addiction and it doesn't get at the core problem yet.
Yeah. Yeah, I loved when you said that we trade happiness for pleasure. And just like we were just saying about greed, your example right there, drugs. So then we do a substitute, because we're seeking after pleasure, thinking that's going to bring us the happiness when we really want the happiness, but we're actually going the opposite direction, because we're going hard after pleasure, which isn't going to bring us the happiness. It's just
right.
And who would have thought we would have gotten all of that from fasting?
I know, yeah.
As well. Yeah. So why do you think, Dan, that because you said in your sermon kind of at the front end that it's just not something that's taught a ton? Why do you think that is? Because as you showed us, this is more than just about withholding food for a month, or doing the different types of fasts that were very prominent in the Old Testament especially, but This is powerful. This is a way of, like you said, drowning out that noise of our existence and plugging more into the heart of God. So why do you think that this isn't taught or talked about more?
Yeah, I think it's one of those situations, unfortunately, where I think a lot of us just assume, oh, I know what that's all about. And so you don't think about it, and you don't sit and wrestle with it, and you don't dwell on it. And so you don't really find the treasures in it. And I hope that, sermons like this, and I hope other people can kind of, keep pushing this and see, what we can learn from this, because I think that there is a lot of power there. I kept coming back to this when I was working on this sermon. Jesus only really focuses on 3 disciplines in the Sermon on the Mount, his most important teaching. And there are lots of disciplines. There's, I think, like 24 well-known kind of historical theological disciplines, but Jesus really only focuses on 3, which in my mind, that means that to Jesus, these were really, really important. And so I just kept thinking, okay, well, what's important about this? And you have to keep kind of going at it. And I'm really glad for my own sake that I did, because I'm just because I'm teaching this doesn't mean I'm,
Right.
anywhere farther than anybody else. I mean, I'm like, especially after the pandemic, Shawna. Oh my goodness, help me.
We'll have to help one another, Dan. I think we can be partners together in this discipline. Well, and like you said, in the focused scripture, Jesus didn't say if you fast. He said when you fast. So there's like this is something that he expected to be happening. And so I think we have to pay attention to that. It's not if you take a breath, when you take a breath, it's an expectation. So thank you for unpacking that for us. I want to give you an opportunity to, lay a nugget on us. That didn't sound weird, to bless us with the nugget. But I want to, first of all, kind of zoom out from this particular discipline of fasting. And I often wonder, when we talk about spiritual practices, we interchange that with spiritual disciplines. I wonder if using the word disciplines, if that causes people just in their brains to be like, I don't want, or just to take this task, this foreboding task that, they have to do in order to earn favor. I wonder if there's a bit of a wordplay going on in people's minds and emotions there. Instead of just seeing this as opportunity, like we've been saying, to just plug into the heart of God, to get to know him more. It's like this, this thing that they have to work through. What do you think about that?
That is, I think that's 100% right. And, the language that we use around it, technically it's right, because it does require discipline. It's really hard to eat something that you rate as a 30 when you could have something that's a 70. And that takes that self-control. So that's what it is. But that, it's just, I think you're exactly right. I think it's hard to sell ourselves on that. We have to sell ourselves on the story. We have to sell ourselves on the payoff. We have to sell ourselves on other things. And so I think that's exactly right. And I think that if we could find the right language around that, I think that would help us maybe hear more about this and get people to share more about it. That would definitely help. It's interesting that the giving, the 3 disciplines of when you give to others, when you fast, and when you pray, people have no hesitancy with the prayer when you pray. That's not we don't call that a discipline, because I think when you're talking with God, there's this inherent kind of payoff to that, whereas the payoff to giving and the payoff to fasting is a lot more ambiguous. So.
Yeah, I think the payoff is more obvious when you're talking about prayer. The payoff for giving, the payoff for fasting is clouded by the sacrifice that we have to make in order to get there. We see that first. Like you said, if I don't eat, then I'm not going to be nourished, and I'm not, I could die, it's just and the same with giving, I'm not going to have enough. We approach giving and fasting from a scarcity mindset versus the abundance in God. Now, we live in a culture of abundance, yes, but I think we spiritually approach things from a scarcity mindset, and that causes us to not want to like lean into those.
Yeah, that is a really, really good point. In fact, that reminds me, you and Scott are doing the class on the disciplines, aren't you?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And when is that? We should.
Yeah, it's going to be, it starts in January. So like after the holidays and after MLK, because, you know, all of those things. But, and it's going to be like for like everyday practical ways in which we can really lean into these disciplines and just kind of make it not scary, and just how you can just see in our everyday lives, how we can embrace spiritual practices in order to get to the beautiful benefit of knowing Jesus, reflecting Jesus, and hearing from him, and, you know, all of that stuff. So I think it's going to be really cool. Scott's still in the process of writing it all up. So we'll see.
Cool.
We'll see where it lands.
I think it's going to be great. I think it's going to be great.
Thank you. All right, Dan, if you had one last thing, one nugget that you want to leave our community with, to close out, put a bow on top of your sermon on fasting, which I'm going to call Personal Exodus, because I think that was a brilliant title. What would that be? Yeah,
you know, the sermon was largely a practical sermon because there was so much like everyday sort of stuff. So my nugget that I want to leave with is more just something to contemplate. And that is just notice. And as I was doing the sermon, I was just really wowed by this. Food plays a very central role in God's story. And it's just like surprisingly central role, where life and death literally came to earth through the fruit of the tree. And you have the Exodus story with manna, and you've got the Levitical food laws, and then you've got, you know, sometimes you have these stories, and there's a lot of them, but like my favorite one is in the book of Daniel, chapter 1, where he wants to show that he could eat vegetables and fruit and be just as strong as the warriors who eat meat. And then you have like, Jesus saying that his food is to do the will of the Lord. And you have him sharing these feasts and the bread and the fish with everybody. And he, it says that the enemy is looking for someone to devour, and there's that eating language again. And then of course it all wraps up in sharing communion together, where we're eating and drinking the blood of Christ. And so it's just so central as a theme there. And I don't know what it all means, but it's interesting how that all relates. And it's one of those things where you think of communion and you think of the fall and you think of the Exodus, and you don't see the food theme through that. And there's something about being nourished. There's something about having life that is connected to food. And I think fasting is an important sort of way to get back in touch with that signal that is there in that reality. So it's just something interesting to think about. But one quick warning is that anytime you talk about food, you can easily become a food Pharisee, and you can get really obsessed about a particular diet, a particular whatever, and you have to guard against that, because food is so important. It can become an idol either intentionally or unintentionally, and you have to use caution about that. That's my nugget.
I love it, Dan. Now of course, the beautiful mind, the wheels are turning. But oh my gosh, you're going to do this search to see the thorough line of the relationship to food, to scripture, and all that. But really cool nugget. Thank you so much. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for your feedback. Thanks for just the way that you guys engage with the things that we do at Woodland Hills. And thank you, Dan, for taking something that we thought we knew it was going to be, but oh, heck no. You just blew those doors open and gave us so much more. Thank you. We encourage you guys to tune in this coming weekend, because the series is not over yet. We're still getting real. We're still talking about the spiritual practices / disciplines, and then circle back with us next Tuesday as we continue the conversation on the MuseCast. Have a great rest of your week, everyone. Bye now.